The sun was high, beaming warmth onto the Danube. Andras, a seasoned canoeist, glided through the water. Each stroke was a testament to his strength, a strength earned through years on the river. He loved these moments, the feel of the sun on his face, the gentle rocking of the canoe. It was a good day. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and laughter, the air thick with the scent of good food and nostalgia. Andras spotted familiar faces, some lined with age, others seemingly untouched by time. Lacey, the life of the party even back then, held court, his booming laugh echoing around the room. And then Andras saw her, Aniko. Their eyes met across the crowded room, a spark of recognition igniting a flame that time had failed to extinguish. She had filled his younger days with a passionate, if brief, love affair. She looked different, a little fuller perhaps, but her eyes still held that same mischievous glint. They fell into conversation easily, the years melting away as they reminisced about shared jokes and youthful escapades. The music started, a slow, familiar melody. Andras held out his hand, an invitation she didn't refuse. As they swayed to the music, the other guests faded into the background. It was just them, lost in a world of their own. A guttural bark ripped through the silence, sending chills down their spines. A stray dog, teeth bared, charged towards them. Andras reacted instinctively, pulling Aniko towards a rickety fence. He jumped, surprised by the ease with which he cleared it. His body felt lighter, stronger than it had in years. Aniko, shaken but unharmed, clung to him. They found themselves on a quiet street, the silence broken only by the occasional passing car. But these weren't the sleek, modern vehicles of their time. These were boxy, unfamiliar contraptions, relics from a bygone era. A lumbering Icarus bus rumbled past, its paint faded and chipped. Andras noticed the road beneath their feet wasn't smooth asphalt, but rough cobblestones. Disjointed thoughts swirled in his mind. It was like stepping into an old photograph, the world around them strangely out of sync. They walked on, their pace brisk, fueled by a mixture of fear and confusion. Familiar landmarks seemed distorted, out of place. This wasn't the Budapest they knew. This felt like a different time. People strolled along the sidewalks, their clothing a stark contrast to the modern styles Andras and Annika were used to. Men sported neatly combed hair and tailored suits, while women wore modest dresses and sensible shoes. There was a distinct lack of urgency in their movements, a stark contrast to the hurried pace of modern life. Andras caught glimpses of himself in shop windows, his reflection startling him. He looked younger, his hair thicker, his face free of the wrinkles that came with time. He glanced at Aniko, noticing her jeans were loose, her figure more youthful. It was as if they had shed years, their bodies reverting to younger versions of themselves. A newsstand caught Andras's eye. The meager selection of newspapers was dwarfed by the bold headlines, the font strangely archaic. He picked one up, his gaze drawn to the date printed in bold type. August 31st, 1974. His blood ran cold. 1974. The year he had graduated high school. The year he had met Aniko. A wave of dizziness washed over him as the impossible truth slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just imagined it, they were in the past. Terror, raw and primal, tightened its grip on Aniko. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. "What are we going to do?" she cried, her voice barely a whisper. "We can't stay here. We don't belong here." Andras, despite his own fear, forced himself to remain calm. He had to be strong for both of them. He took her hand, his touch a reassuring anchor in the storm of their confusion. "Look," he said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Think of it as an adventure." He pointed towards a nearby park, its benches filled with young couples. "We have a chance to relive our youth, to make different choices, to right past wrongs." He squeezed her hand. "We can see our parents again, experience it all over again. Isn't that something?" Aniko's eyes, wide with panic moments ago, softened slightly. She looked around at the bustling street scene, at the faces of strangers who, in a different time, were part of her past. A flicker of wonder warred with the fear in her eyes. Andras pressed on, drawing on a lifetime of experience to project an air of confidence he didn't quite feel. "We'll figure it out," he promised, his voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "We'll find a way back." He had to believe that. He had to believe there was a way back to their time, back to their lives, back to their family. Andras walked Aniko home, their footsteps echoing on the strangely quiet streets. The city, once so familiar, now felt like a foreign land. He stole glances at Aniko, her face pale in the golden glow of the streetlights. He knew she was struggling to process the impossible just as he was. They reached her childhood home, a modest building that seemed to have weathered the years better than its occupants. Aniko hesitated at the entrance, her hand hovering over the doorbell. Andras saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the overwhelming urge to run, to escape back into the fog and pray for a different outcome. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "It's going to be all right," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her ears. "Just talk to them. They'll understand." He wasn't sure if he believed his own words, but he clung to them like a lifeline. With a deep breath, Aniko rang the doorbell. The sound, a shrill, metallic clang, seemed to echo in the stillness of the evening. They waited, their breaths held captive in their chests, as footsteps approached from within. The door creaked open, revealing a woman who could only be Aniko's mother, her face a younger, unlined version of the one Andras knew. Aniko's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper. "Mama?" she said, the word heavy with unshed tears and a lifetime of unspoken emotions. The woman's brow furrowed in confusion, her gaze darting between Aniko and Andras as if trying to place them in the tapestry of her memory. The next morning, Andras woke with a start. The events of the previous day, so surreal, so impossible, crashed over him like a tidal wave. He was back in his childhood bedroom, the wallpaper adorned with faded posters of rock bands he hadn't thought about in decades. For a moment, he could almost believe it was all a bad dream. He caught his reflection in the dusty mirror above his desk. Gone were the wrinkles and the silver that had crept into his hair. He looked like he did in his graduation picture, full of youthful energy and a future yet unwritten. The sight, both familiar and unsettling, filled him with a strange mix of nostalgia and dread. He found Aniko waiting for him outside the school gates, her face pale and drawn. The weight of their situation, the enormity of their loss, hung heavy in the air between them. They had awoken in a time that no longer belonged to them, stripped of their families, their lives, their identities. The school day passed in a blur of unfamiliar faces and lessons that felt like distant echoes of a life lived long ago. They were strangers in a familiar land, their memories a confusing jumble of past and present. The carefree laughter of their classmates grated on their nerves, a stark reminder of their own stolen youth. As they walked home that afternoon, the weight of their secret, a secret too impossible to share, threatened to crush them. They stopped at a small cafe, seeking solace in the familiar aroma of coffee and pastries. As they sipped their drinks, Andras noticed a flicker of defiance in Aniko's eyes, a spark of the fiery spirit he remembered. "We can't give up," she said, her voice low but firm. "We have to find a way back." Andras nodded, drawing strength from her determination. "You're right," he said. "We can't change what happened, but we can control how we react to it." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. He thought of his wife Irina, her laughter, the warmth of her embrace. He thought of his children, their faces etched in his memory. He would find a way back to them, he vowed silently. He had to. They were his everything. An idea began to form in his mind, a risky, improbable plan, but one that offered a glimmer of hope in the darkness. "What if we try to recreate the events that led us here?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What if, by retracing our steps, we can trigger something, some kind of temporal anomaly that will send us back?" Aniko's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and skepticism flitting across her features. "Do you really think it could work?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. Andras shrugged, unsure himself but unwilling to give in to despair. "It's a long shot," he admitted, "but at this point, what do we have to lose?" They were adrift in time, their lives on hold, their future uncertain. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. They had to try. Andras knew what he had to do. He had to recreate the past, down to the smallest detail. He remembered their first time, a stolen weekend at his parents' cottage, a memory etched in his mind with the clarity of a photograph. "We need to go to my parents' cottage," he told Aniko, his voice firm despite the tremor of uncertainty that ran through him. He saw the confusion in her eyes, but he pressed on, explaining his theory, his hope that by reliving that weekend they could somehow unravel the threads of time that had entangled them. Aniko, to her credit, didn't hesitate. She trusted him, even now, even faced with the impossible. They boarded a rickety train, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil in their hearts. The scenery flashed past, a tapestry of rolling hills and quaint villages, each landmark a jarring reminder of their displacement. The cottage, when they reached it, was exactly as he remembered it. Small, nestled amidst a grove of birch trees, a place where time seemed to stand still. It felt like stepping into a forgotten dream, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and wood smoke. They fell into a familiar routine, their movements guided by muscle memory and the echoes of a past love. They swam in the lake, the cool water washing away the dust of the city and the weight of their worries. They lay beneath the stars, whispering secrets and sharing dreams that now seemed both distant and impossibly close. Their idyllic interlude couldn't last forever. The school year loomed, a stark reminder of the life they were trying to reclaim, or perhaps escape from. Back in the city, the weight of their situation pressed down on them with renewed force. They were surrounded by people living their lives in blissful ignorance, while Andras and Aniko carried the burden of their secret, a secret that separated them from everyone and everything they held dear. The familiar routine of school, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel joke. They sat through lessons, their minds a million miles away, the words washing over them without meaning, the carefree chatter of their classmates, their concerns so trivial grated on their nerves. Andras struggled to keep up. His mind, accustomed to the complexities of his adult life, rebelled against the simplicity of high school algebra and history lessons. Aniko fared better, her younger self apparently more academically inclined. Still, the strain was beginning to show, the constant pressure of their situation etching lines on their faces that belied their youthful appearance. "We can't go on like this," Andras confessed one evening, his voice heavy with despair. They were sitting in a small park, the air thick with the scent of rain and approaching autumn. "We're just going through the motions, pretending to be someone we're not." Aniko nodded, her eyes reflecting his own sense of hopelessness. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of leaves. "But what else can we do?" The question hung between them, unanswered, a stark reminder of their powerlessness. They were trapped in a time not their own, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, clinging to the hope that somehow, someday, they would find their way back to the life they had lost. As summer faded into autumn, a sense of urgency settled over Andras. He had received his acceptance letter to the Kiev Polytechnic Institute, a bittersweet victory that filled him with both dread and anticipation. It was a step closer to Irina, to the life they had built together, and yet it also meant leaving Aniko behind, their shared journey reaching an inevitable fork in the road. Their last night together was a blur of unspoken words and shared memories. They walked hand in hand along the banks of the Danube, the city lights shimmering on the water's surface. They spoke of the future, of the lives they hoped to rebuild, their voices tinged with a sadness that belied their youthful facades. At the train station, as Andras prepared to board the train that would take him back to the Soviet Union, back to Irina, he pulled Aniko close, his arms enveloping her in a hug that spoke volumes of their shared journey, their unspoken bond. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Aniko stepped back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Don't forget about me," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "and don't forget about us." Andras boarded the train, his heart heavy in his chest. As the train pulled away from the station, he caught one last glimpse of Aniko, her figure a solitary silhouette on the platform, her arm raised in a farewell wave. He closed his eyes, the memory of her smile, bittersweet and full of unspoken promises, etched into his heart. The journey to Kiev was long and arduous, the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels a constant reminder of the distance he had to travel, both physically and metaphorically. He spent the long hours lost in thought, replaying the events of the past few months, trying to make sense of the impossible. Kiev welcomed him back like a long-lost friend. The familiar sights and sounds of the city, the smell of borscht wafting from street vendors, the melodic cadence of the Russian language all washed over him, a comforting balm to his weary soul. He had returned to the place where he had met Irina, where their love story had begun. He found a room in a communal apartment, a far cry from the life he had built with Irina, but a temporary measure. A stepping stone on his journey back to her. He enrolled at the institute, throwing himself into his studies with a fervor he hadn't felt in his first life. Perhaps it was the weight of his experiences, the knowledge of a life lived and lost, that gave him a new perspective, a deeper appreciation for the gift of time. He counted down the days, the hours, until their fateful encounter at the ice cream kiosk. He remembered the exact date, the exact time, the way the sunlight had glinted off her hair as she had turned to smile at him. He had memorized every detail, every nuance, determined to recreate the moment, to seize the second chance at love. On that day, his heart pounding in his chest, he stood across the street from the kiosk, watching as people came and went, his eyes searching for the familiar figure that haunted his dreams. And then he saw her, Irina, even more beautiful than he remembered, her laughter like music to his ears. He crossed the street, his steps light, his heart soaring. As she turned to look at him, her eyes widening in recognition, he knew with a certainty that defied logic that he was home. Their love story, interrupted by an impossible twist of fate, was about to begin anew. He stood before her, a familiar stranger, his heart overflowing with a love that transcended time. Irina, her eyes, those expressive brown eyes that had captivated him a lifetime ago, held a flicker of curiosity, a hint of recognition that sent shivers down his spine. "Is it good?" he asked, his voice a low murmur, echoing the words he had spoken on that fateful day so many years ago. Irina laughed, a melodic sound that filled him with a joy he had almost forgotten. "Very tasty," she replied, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I love it." And just like that, their dance began anew. They strolled through the bustling streets of Kiev, their conversations a mix of shy smiles and shared dreams. He listened, truly listened, as she spoke of her aspirations, her fears, her hopes for the future. He knew her story, knew the path their lives would take, and yet he found himself captivated by her, drawn to her spirit, her warmth, her unwavering zest for life. He took her to the park where they had shared their first kiss. The memory of that moment, bittersweet and poignant, flooding back to him. He watched the way the sunlight played on her hair, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, and he knew with a certainty that defied all logic that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was determined to savor every moment, to make up for lost time, to build a foundation of love and trust that would weather any storm, even the impossible storm of time travel. But the joy of their reunion was tempered by the looming pressure of exams. Andras, despite possessing the knowledge and experience of a lifetime lived, found himself struggling to recall the intricacies of differential equations and thermodynamics. His mind, accustomed to the complexities of his career, rebelled against the rote memorization and theoretical concepts that seemed so important in this simpler time. He spent long nights hunched over textbooks, the words blurring together in a dizzying dance. The pressure was immense. He had to succeed, not just for himself, but for Irina. He couldn't bear the thought of jeopardizing their future, a future he had already lived and cherished, by failing to navigate the academic hurdles of his youth. Irina, sensing his anxiety, offered words of encouragement and cups of strong, sweet tea. He watched her, his heart aching with a love that only deepened with time as she studied diligently at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. He drew strength from her presence, from the knowledge that he was not alone in this strange journey. They were a team, united against the odds, their love a beacon of hope in a world that suddenly felt both familiar and unsettlingly foreign. He knew he couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't burden her with the weight of his secret, and so he carried on, playing the part of the ambitious student while silently grappling with the ghosts of exams past and the fear of repeating past mistakes. As the day of the entrance exam approached, Andras found himself wrestling with a dilemma. He could easily ace the exam, relying on the knowledge gleaned from his first life, but would that be fair? Would it be right to achieve success through what amounted to cheating, even if it meant securing a future with Irina? He confided his concerns to Aniko, seeking solace in their shared experience, their unique understanding of the impossible situation they found themselves in. They met in a quiet corner of a dimly lit cafe, the aroma of strong coffee and sweet pastries, a familiar comfort in a world that felt increasingly surreal. "What if I fail?" Andras asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What if I ruin everything by trying to force things to happen the way they did before?" Aniko, her eyes reflecting the weight of their shared secret, reached across the table, her hand covering his in a gesture of reassurance. "You won't fail," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her voice. "You're stronger than you think you are. And besides," she added, a mischievous glint in her eye, "a little bit of knowledge from the future never hurt anyone, did it?" Her words, laced with humor and a hint of defiance, struck a chord within him. He realized that he couldn't let fear dictate his actions, couldn't allow the past to control his present. He had a chance to build a life with Irina, a life based on honesty and trust. And he wouldn't squander it by dwelling on what-ifs and maybes. The exam hall was a cacophony of rustling papers and nervous whispers. Andras sat at his assigned desk, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind a whirlwind of equations and historical dates. He glanced around at the other students, their faces etched with a mixture of anxiety and determination, their futures hanging in the balance. He took a deep breath, centering himself, reminding himself that he had been here before, had faced this challenge and emerged victorious. But this time felt different. This time he carried the weight of two lives, two sets of memories, two futures intertwined. He picked up his pen, the familiar weight a comfort in his hand. As his eyes scanned the exam questions, a sense of calm washed over him. He knew the answers, not because he had memorized them from a textbook, but because he had lived them, had experienced the consequences of his choices, had learned from his mistakes. The hours passed in a blur of concentrated effort. When he finally handed in his exam paper, his hand trembling slightly, he felt a sense of accomplishment that transcended grades and academic achievement. He had faced his fear, had confronted the ghosts of his past, and had emerged stronger, more determined than ever to create a future worthy of the sacrifices he had made, the love he had found, and the life he was determined to live to the fullest. He stepped out of the exam hall and into the bright sunshine, a sense of relief washing over him. He had made his choice. He would face the future head-on, embracing the uncertainties and celebrating the victories, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Irina by his side, their love a constant, unwavering force in a world that seemed determined to test the very fabric of time and fate. The days that followed the exam were a blur of anticipation and nervous energy. Andras threw himself into his training at the Spartak rowing club, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of the oars, the feel of the water slipping beneath the hull of his boat. The physical exertion, the camaraderie of his fellow athletes provided a welcome distraction from the turmoil of his thoughts. He had aced the exam, exceeding even his own expectations. His professors, impressed by his grasp of complex concepts and his insightful analysis, praised his work, unaware that their star student was drawing on knowledge gleaned from a lifetime lived twice over. The news of his success filled him with a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had proven to himself that he could achieve his goals, could overcome the challenges of this second chance at life, without resorting to shortcuts or relying on knowledge of the future. His victory was made even sweeter by the knowledge that he could now share his life with Irina, could build a future with her, a future free from the shadows of his past. He found her waiting for him outside the institute, her eyes sparkling with pride and love. "I knew you could do it," she whispered, her arms wrapping around him in a hug that spoke volumes of their shared journey, their unwavering belief in each other. He held her close, savoring the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her embrace. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of Kiev, he allowed himself to believe that they had outrun the ghosts of the past, that their future together stretched before them bright and full of promise. The years that followed were a whirlwind of love, laughter, and shared dreams. Andras and Irina built a life together, their bond deepening with each passing day. They married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by family and friends, their happiness a beacon of hope in a world still emerging from the shadow of war. Andras excelled in his studies, graduating with honors and securing a coveted position at a prestigious engineering firm. His work, fueled by a passion for innovation and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, earned him recognition and respect within his field. Irina, true to her nature, pursued her love of art, her paintings capturing the beauty and resilience of the human spirit. Their small apartment became a sanctuary filled with the colors of her canvases, the scent of linseed oil and turpentine, the echo of their laughter. They welcomed 2 children into their lives, a boy and a girl, their arrival filling their world with a joy that transcended words. Andras, determined to be present in every moment, to cherish the precious gift of time, balanced the demands of his work with the joys of fatherhood. He taught his children to ride bikes, to fish, to appreciate the beauty of the natural world. He told them stories, fantastical tales of adventure and imagination, his voice warm and reassuring in the quiet of their shared evenings. Life wasn't always easy. They faced challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But through it all, their love for each other, their unwavering belief in the strength of their bond, saw them through. As the years turned into decades, Andras couldn't shake the feeling that he was living a strange, recurring dream. The milestones of his life, his children's graduations, the birth of his first grandchild, the silver anniversary celebration with Irina, all seemed eerily familiar, as if he had experienced them before, in a different time, a different life. He found himself paying attention to small details, seemingly insignificant moments, as if searching for a clue, a sign that would unravel the mystery of his existence. The way the sunlight filtered through the leaves of the birch trees outside their summer cottage, the scent of Irina's perfume, the sound of his grandson's laughter, all evoked a sense of déjà vu, a feeling that he was both an observer and a participant in his own life. He kept his suspicions to himself, afraid to burden Irina with the weight of his secret, a secret that grew heavier with each passing year. He threw himself into his work, his family, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms of his life, even as a part of him yearned for answers, for a way to make sense of the strange loop he seemed to be trapped in. He found himself drawn back to the Danube, the river of his youth, the site of his first impossible journey through time. He would sit on the riverbank, watching the water flow by, its ceaseless movement, a metaphor for the passage of time, the cyclical nature of life and death, and the possibility, however remote, that he was destined to repeat his journey again and again for all eternity. And then, one hot summer day, as Andras was preparing for his high school reunion, the world shifted on its axis once more. He was back in Budapest, standing before the mirror in his childhood bedroom, his reflection staring back at him with youthful eyes that belied the weight of his memories. The familiar scent of his mother's goulash wafted from the kitchen, the sound of his father's laughter echoing from the living room. It was as if no time had passed, as if the intervening decades had been nothing more than a vivid, unsettling dream. He thought of Irina, of their children, of the life they had built together, a life filled with love, laughter, and the bittersweet joy of shared memories. He clung to the hope that they too were experiencing this temporal reset, that they would find their way back to each other, just as they had done before. He looked at his reflection, his gaze steady, his jaw set with determination. He didn't know why or how this was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. He would find Irina, he would rebuild their life, he would cherish every moment, every laughter, every tear, for as long as fate allowed. He had a chance to get it right, to make different choices, to savor the precious gift of time. And this time he would do everything in his power to break the cycle, to rewrite the ending, to create a future where love, not time, would have the final say. The reunion awaited, He had a date with destiny, a waltz with the past, and a future that shimmered before him, full of infinite possibilities. The cycle, it seemed, was about to begin again. But perhaps, just perhaps, this time it would be different. Andras adjusted his tie, the knot feeling tight, unfamiliar. He stared at his reflection, a younger version of himself staring back. The years, the memories, the love, the loss, it all felt like a dream, a faded tapestry woven from moments both cherished and regretted. He thought of Irina, her smile, the warmth of her hand in his, the echo of her laughter in their home. Would he find her again in this replayed past? Would their love story unfold once more? Or was he destined to walk a different path this time around? He left the apartment, the door clicking shut behind him, a sound that echoed with the weight of choices made and paths not taken. The city buzzed with life, the air thick with the scent of diesel fuel and a hopefulness that only existed in a time before the world felt jaded. He hailed a taxi, the driver's gruff greeting a familiar refrain from a life he had lived before. As the car rumbled through the streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was both a participant and an observer, an actor in a play he had already seen, yet powerless to change the script. The restaurant bustled with familiar faces, his classmates frozen in time, their laughter tinged with the innocence of youth. He saw Lacey, his booming laugh unchanged, and Aniko, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint that hinted at the whirlwind romance they would share. He felt a hand on his shoulder, a touch that sent a jolt through him, a current of electricity bridging the years. He turned, and there she was, Irina. Her eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, holding his gaze with a familiarity that transcended time and circumstance. "Andras?" she asked, her voice a soft melody that tugged at his heartstrings. "Is it really you?" He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, the warmth of her touch anchoring him to the present, to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. "It's me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's really me." As they stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the restaurant lights, the world around them faded away. Time, it seemed, had given him a second chance, a chance to rewrite their love story, to navigate the twists and turns of fate with the wisdom of experience and the hope of a future yet unwritten. The music started, a slow, romantic melody that tugged at his heartstrings. He held out his hand, an invitation to dance, an invitation to embrace the unknown, to trust in the power of love to transcend even the most impossible of circumstances. This time, he wouldn't let go. This time, he would hold on tight to Irina, to their love, to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this time, time itself would be on their side.